December 12th, 1944. The small Belgian village of Bastogne lay shrouded in mist, its ancient stone buildings glistening with frost as Private First Class Thomas Calloway huddled in the doorway of an abandoned storefront. The young soldier from rural Oklahoma shivered despite his layers of wool and cotton, his threadbare gloves offering little protection against the bitter European winter. Before we dive into this story, drop a quick hi in the comments and tell me where you're watching from. It really helps support the channel. What Calloway could not know as he stamped his feet against the cold was that his simple act of compassion in the coming hours would not only change his life forever, but would also reveal how even in the darkest moments of human conflict, unexpected connections could blossom into something extraordinary. I swear if they don't rotate us back to town soon, I'm going to lose my toes to frostbite, Private Calloway muttered to Sergeant Frank Miller, who was methodically cleaning his field binoculars with a handkerchief. "Quit your belly aching, Calloway," Miller replied, though without malice. At 32, the sergeant was practically ancient by frontline standards, a former schoolteacher from Pennsylvania, whose receding hairline and perpetually furrowed brow gave him the appearance of someone's stern uncle. The 101st got the short end of the stick, but at least we're not sleeping in foxholes like Baker Company. Calloway nodded reluctantly. Their regiment of the 101st Airborne Division had been deployed to this sector for nearly 3 weeks now, part of a massive build-up of Allied forces preparing for what everyone hoped would be the final push into Germany. After the brutal fighting following D-Day, their current assignment as a reserve unit felt almost like a vacation, despite the miserable weather. "Any word on those supplies, Sarge?" Calloway asked, his breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. "Command says tomorrow, maybe the day after," Miller replied, tucking his binoculars back into their case. "Seems the entire 12th Corps is running on fumes. 300,000 troops across this sector, and apparently every last one of them needs the same blankets, ammunition, and cigarettes we do." Calloway sighed. His own pack of cigarettes had dwindled to just 2 remaining, and he'd been saving them for a true emergency. At 19 years old, Thomas Calloway stood 5 feet 9 inches tall, with a lean frame that had grown even leaner since joining the army. Back home in Tulsa, he'd been the 3rd son of a railroad worker, with no prospects beyond following his father onto the trains. The military had seemed like an adventure when he enlisted, a chance to see the world beyond Oklahoma. Now, 18 months later, he'd seen more of the world than he'd ever wanted. "Think we'll be home by Christmas, Sarge?" Calloway asked, though he already knew the answer. Miller gave him a look that was somewhere between pity and amusement. "This Christmas? Not a chance, kid. But maybe next year if we're lucky. The Germans are on the ropes, but they're still dangerous. Intelligence reports say they've got something brewing, though nobody seems to know what." Their conversation was interrupted by the approach of Corporal Henry Jackson, a broad-shouldered former football player from Detroit, whose dark skin was currently tinged blue from the cold. "Lieutenant Hayes wants both of you at the command post," Jackson said, stamping his feet to keep warm. "Something about patrol schedules." Miller nodded. "Well, that's our cue. Come on, Calloway. Maybe they've got a fire going at headquarters." The 3 soldiers trudged through the narrow streets of Bastogne, past buildings that had been requisitioned as barracks, supply depots, and makeshift hospitals. The town itself was a strategic crossroads, with 7 major roads converging like the spokes of a wheel. Whoever controlled Bastogne controlled movement through this entire section of Belgium, a fact that was not lost on either the Allied or German high command. At the command post, established in what had once been the town's administrative building, Lieutenant William Hayes was huddled over a map with Captain Robert Thompson. Hayes was a recent West Point graduate, barely older than Calloway himself, while Thompson was a battle-hardened veteran of North Africa and Sicily. "Ah, Miller," Thompson said as they entered. "Just the man I wanted to see. We need to adjust the patrol routes. Intelligence suggests there might be increased German activity to our east." "Increased activity, sir?" Miller asked, removing his helmet. "Any specifics?" Thompson shook his head. "Nothing concrete. Reconnaissance flights have been limited due to the weather, but there have been reports of vehicle movements behind the German lines. Could be a redeployment, could be a build-up for something bigger. Either way, Division wants us to keep our eyes open." Hayes traced a line on the map with his finger. We're extending the patrol radius by 2 miles in these sectors. I want 3-man teams, 4-hour rotations. Sergeant Miller, your squad will take the northeastern route, starting at 0600 tomorrow." Miller studied the map, his expression thoughtful. "That's going to put us awfully close to reported German positions, sir." "It's observation only," Thompson emphasized. "Any contact with enemy forces, you withdraw immediately and report back. We're not looking for a fight, just information." "Understood, sir," Miller replied. As they discussed the details of the patrol schedule, Calloway couldn't help but notice the tension in Captain Thompson's posture. Despite his casual tone, something clearly had the captain concerned. After the briefing, as they made their way back to their assigned quarters, Calloway voiced his observation to Miller. "Did the captain seem worried to you, Sarge?" Miller was quiet for a moment before responding. "Thompson's got good instincts. If he's concerned, there's probably a reason." "You think the Germans are planning something?" Calloway pressed. "I think we're in a war, private, and in a war. You should always assume the enemy is planning something," Miller replied. "But don't go spreading rumors. The last thing we need is panic based on hunches." They reached their temporary home, a former hardware store that now housed 12 men from their platoon. Inside, soldiers were engaged in the timeless activities of armies everywhere, playing cards, writing letters home, cleaning equipment, and complaining about the food. "Patrol tomorrow, northeastern sector," Miller announced to the room. "Calloway, Jackson, you're with me, 0600 sharp." Groans met this announcement, particularly from Jackson. "Northeastern sector, that's all hills and forest. My feet are just now thawing out from the last patrol." "Take it up with the Germans," Miller said dryly. "Apparently they're not respecting your comfort." Calloway claimed a spot near the small iron stove that served as the room's only source of heat, and pulled out a wrinkled letter from his pocket. It was from his mother, 3 weeks old now, filled with news of home that seemed to belong to another life entirely. She wrote about his younger sister's school achievements, his father's promotion at the railroad, and how their victory garden had yielded enough tomatoes to can for the winter. It was strange how such ordinary details could seem so precious from 4,000 miles away. As evening approached, Calloway drew the assignment of collecting the unit's water rations from the town's central distribution point. Grabbing several canteens and a small metal cart, he made his way through the darkening streets. Bastogne had once been a picturesque Belgian town with centuries-old architecture and quaint shops. Now it was a military hub, its narrow streets clogged with jeeps and transport trucks, its buildings commandeered for war purposes. The water distribution center had been set up in the town square, where a team of engineers had established a purification system drawing from the local wells. A line of soldiers from various units stretched across the cobblestones, each waiting their turn. Calloway took his place at the end of the line, nodding to a few familiar faces from other companies. The waiting time gave soldiers a chance to exchange information, rumors, and the occasional contraband, cigarettes, chocolate, or other small luxuries. "Heard anything from the front?" Calloway asked a corporal from the 28th Infantry Division who stood ahead of him. "Quiet as a graveyard," the corporal replied. "Too quiet, if you ask me. Been that way for almost 2 weeks now." "Maybe they're finally giving up," suggested another soldier. This one from a signal corps unit. The corporal snorted. "Germans? Not likely. My lieutenant says they're regrouping, says all this quiet is just the calm before the storm." Calloway was about to respond when movement at the edge of the square caught his attention. A figure, slender and clearly civilian, was hurrying across the open space, head down and shoulders hunched against the cold. It was unusual to see Belgian civilians out after curfew, especially approaching a military position. As the figure drew closer, Calloway realized it was a woman, young, perhaps in her mid-20s, wearing a threadbare coat that was clearly inadequate for the December weather. Her dark hair was partially covered by a woolen scarf, and she clutched a small bundle tightly to her chest. The military police stationed at the water distribution point noticed her as well. 2 MPs moved to intercept her, their stance professional but cautious. Although Belgium had been liberated months ago, security remained tight, with concerns about German sympathizers or even infiltrators behind Allied lines. "Halt!" one of the MPs called out in English, then repeated the command in halting French. The woman stopped, her eyes wide with what Calloway recognized immediately as fear. She said something in rapid French, her voice pleading. The MPs looked at each other, clearly struggling with the language barrier. Calloway hesitated only briefly before stepping out of line. His French was rudimentary at best, learned through a pocket dictionary and interactions with locals over the past few months, but it was better than nothing. "I can help translate, sir," he offered to the MPs as he approached. The senior MP, a staff sergeant with a Boston accent, nodded gratefully. "Ask her what she's doing out after curfew and where she's going." Calloway turned to the woman and slowly attempted to form the question in French. His pronunciation was terrible, but she seemed to understand the gist of what he was asking. Her response came in a flood of French, too rapid for him to follow, her hands gesturing animatedly. Seeing his confusion, she switched to broken English. "Please, I need help," she said, her accent thick but understandable. "My home, it is taken by soldiers for quarters. I have nowhere to go tonight. It is very cold." Calloway translated this for the MPs, though they had understood much of it themselves. "What's your name?" the staff sergeant asked directly. "Marie Dubois," she replied, clutching her bundle tighter. Now that he was closer, Calloway could see that she was shivering, her lips tinged slightly blue from the cold. "Papers?" the MP asked. She nodded quickly and produced identification documents from inside her coat. The MP examined them carefully under his flashlight. "These look legitimate," he said after a moment, handing them back, "but we can't have civilians wandering around after curfew. It's for your own safety as well as military security." Marie nodded her understanding, but gestured around helplessly. "Where can I go? My house is full of American soldiers now." The MP sighed, clearly torn between protocol and compassion. "The civilian refugee center is on the other side of town, but it's probably full by now." He turned to his partner. "Johnson, radio headquarters and see if they've got space at the refugee center." While they waited for the response, Calloway noticed Marie sway slightly on her feet. She was clearly exhausted and affected by the cold. Against his better judgment, he offered her his canteen of water, which she accepted with grateful eyes. Johnson returned with a shake of his head. "Refugee center's been at capacity since noon. They're not taking anyone else tonight." The staff sergeant frowned. "Great. Well, we can't just leave her out here to freeze." He considered for a moment. "Maybe the church. They've been taking in some locals." "St. Peter's is full too," Johnson replied. "Chaplain Wilson mentioned it earlier today." Marie seemed to understand enough of the conversation to realize her situation was precarious. Her eyes darted between the soldiers, a hint of panic beginning to show. "Please," she said softly, "just somewhere warm for tonight. Tomorrow I will find my cousin in next village." Calloway found himself speaking before he'd fully thought it through. "Sergeant Miller might allow her to stay at our quarters, just for tonight. We've got that small storage room in the back. It's not much, but it's warm and private." The MPs looked at him with raised eyebrows. "That's against about 6 different regulations, private," the staff sergeant said. "I know, sir," Calloway acknowledged, "but it's either that or she spends the night in the cold. Our unit is decent. She'd be safe, I promise. And it would just be until morning when she can go to the refugee center or find her cousin." The MPs exchanged a look, clearly weighing their options. Finally, the staff sergeant nodded. "I don't see much alternative, but this is your responsibility, Private. Your sergeant needs to approve it, and I want her at the refugee center first thing tomorrow morning, understood?" "Yes, sir," Calloway replied, feeling both relief and a sudden anxiety about what Sergeant Miller would say. He quickly explained to Marie what had been decided, and though she seemed confused at first, her gratitude was evident when she understood she would have shelter for the night. After collecting his unit's water rations, Calloway escorted Marie back toward their quarters, aware of the curious glances they received from other soldiers they passed. For her part, Marie walked with her head down, still clutching her small bundle, which Calloway now suspected contained all the possessions she'd managed to grab, before being displaced from her home. "My name is Thomas," he said slowly, attempting to bridge the awkward silence. "Thomas Calloway." "Marie," she replied simply, offering a small smile that transformed her tired face. Despite the circumstances, Calloway couldn't help but notice she was quite beautiful, with delicate features and expressive brown eyes. "You speak English good," he offered. "A little," she admitted. "I learn in school, before the war, not much practice since." When they arrived at the hardware store, Calloway hesitated at the door. "Wait here one moment," he told Marie. "I need to speak with my sergeant first." Inside, he found Miller reviewing maps at a small table, while most of the other men were settling in for the night, arranging their bedrolls on the floor between shelving units and display cases. "Sergeant Miller, can I have a word?" Calloway asked, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Miller looked up with a raised eyebrow. "What is it, Calloway? And where are those water canteens?" "Right here, sir," Calloway said, placing the cart near the stove. "But there's something else. There's a Belgian woman outside, Marie Dubois. Her home's been requisitioned for quarters, and the refugee center is full. The MP's authorized her to stay here for the night, if you approve, just until morning when she can go to her cousin's village." Miller's expression hardened. "Have you lost your mind, Private? This isn't a hotel." "I know, Sarge," Calloway said quickly, "but she has nowhere else to go and it's freezing out there. We've got that storage room in the back. She could stay there, wouldn't be in anyone's way." "Absolutely not," Miller said firmly. "This is a military post, not a charity." Corporal Jackson, who had been listening from nearby, joined the conversation. "Come on, Sarge, it's just one night. What's the harm?" "The harm, Corporal, is in breaking regulations designed to maintain security and order," Miller replied sharply. "For all we know, she could be gathering intelligence." "She's just a civilian who needs help," Calloway persisted. "The MPs checked her papers. They're the ones who suggested she come here." Miller's expression suggested he wasn't convinced. "And why would they do that?" "Because there's literally nowhere else," Calloway said, an edge of frustration in his voice. "We're supposed to be protecting these people, aren't we? What kind of protection is leaving a woman to freeze in the streets?" This seemed to give Miller pause. After a moment, he sighed heavily. "One night, just one. And she stays in the storage room with the door closed. She's gone by 0600 tomorrow before we leave for patrol, and you, Calloway, are personally responsible for her. Anything goes missing, anything happens, it's on your head. Clear?" "Crystal clear, Sergeant, thank you," Calloway replied, relief evident in his voice. When he brought Marie inside, there was an immediate shift in the atmosphere of the room. Some of the men straightened their posture, others quickly tried to tidy their areas, and a few exchanged knowing glances that made Calloway uncomfortable. "This is Marie," he announced somewhat awkwardly. "She'll be staying in the back room tonight by permission of Sergeant Miller. She'll be gone in the morning." Miller approached, his manner professional but not unkind. "Miss Dubois, I understand you need shelter for the night. We can offer you the storage room. It's not much, but it's warm and private." Marie nodded gratefully. "Thank you. Sergeant, I will not be trouble." "See that you're not," Miller replied, then turned to address the room at large. "This woman is under our protection tonight, gentlemen. I expect each of you to behave with the honor and respect that reflects well on the United States Army. Anyone who forgets that will answer directly to me. Is that understood?" A chorus of "Yes, Sergeant" filled the room, and Calloway noticed Marie visibly relax at Miller's authoritative protection. Calloway showed Marie to the small storage room at the back of the building. It had been partially cleared out to store some of the unit's supplies, but there was enough space for someone to sleep comfortably. A small window, now covered with blackout material, would have provided light during the day. "It's not much," Calloway said apologetically, finding a spare blanket to offer her. "It is perfect," Marie replied with genuine gratitude. "Much better than outside." As she settled in, Calloway noticed she was still shivering. Without hesitation, he removed his own jacket and offered it to her. "Here, take this, I've got another layer." She hesitated. "You will be cold." "I'll be fine," he assured her, though in truth he was already feeling the chill without his jacket. "I'm used to it." Marie accepted the jacket with a grateful nod. "Thank you, Thomas. You are kind, man." "Just doing what anyone would do," he replied, suddenly self-conscious. "Are you hungry? I don't have much, but I can share my rations. I have small bread. she said, indicating her bundle, is enough. Calloway nodded. All right then. Try to get some rest. I'll be just outside if you need anything. As he turned to leave, Marie spoke again, her voice quiet. Your family, they are in America. Calloway paused in the doorway. Yes, in Oklahoma. That's in the middle of the country. They must miss you very much, she said. I hope so, he replied with a small smile. I miss them. Marie's expression grew distant. My family is gone. Father and brother taken by Germans 2 years ago. Mother died last winter. Sickness, no medicine. Calloway felt a pang of sympathy mixed with the familiar anger that rose whenever he heard such stories, tales of civilian suffering that were all too common across Europe. I'm sorry, he said simply, knowing the words were inadequate. She shrugged slightly. Many people have sad stories now. War makes everyone poor in some way. She looked up at him with a sad smile. Even American soldiers far from home. There was a wisdom in her words that struck Calloway deeply. Despite their different backgrounds and the language barrier between them, Marie had articulated something he'd felt but couldn't express, that the war had created a kind of shared poverty of spirit that transcended nationality. Get some sleep, he said gently. Things might look better tomorrow. As he closed the door, Calloway was surprised by the connection he'd felt with this stranger. In the middle of war, with death and destruction all around, simple human interactions took on a profound significance. Back in the main room, some of the men were still awake, talking in low voices or writing letters by the dim light of shielded flashlights. Calloway made his way to his bedroll, aware of several curious glances. She settled in okay? Jackson asked as Calloway lay down. Yeah, seems so, Calloway replied. She's had it rough, lost her whole family. Jackson nodded solemnly. Lot of that going around makes you realize how lucky we are, even being here. Lucky isn't exactly the word I'd use, Calloway said with a wry smile. Well, we're alive, aren't we? Got food, shelter, each other. That's more than a lot of folks around here can say. Calloway had to concede the point. For all the hardships of military life, American soldiers were indeed fortunate compared to the civilians caught in the crossfire of this devastating conflict. As he tried to sleep, Calloway found his thoughts returning to Marie. There was something about her quiet dignity in the face of overwhelming loss that impressed him. She hadn't complained or sought pity, just stated the facts of her situation with a stoic acceptance that seemed beyond her years. He wondered about her life before the war, what she had studied in school, what her ambitions had been, what simple pleasures she had enjoyed before the world descended into chaos. These were the human costs of war that rarely made it into the official histories or newspaper headlines, the countless interrupted lives, the dreams deferred or destroyed. Morning came too quickly, heralded by Sergeant Miller's voice rousing the men at 5:30. Calloway blinked away his fatigue, having slept poorly due to both the cold and his thoughts about their unexpected guest. As the unit began preparing for the day's patrol, Calloway made his way to the storage room. He knocked gently on the door, unsure if Marie was awake yet. There was no response. He knocked again, a bit louder this time. Marie? It's Thomas. We need to get ready for patrol soon. Still silence. With a growing sense of concern, Calloway slowly opened the door. The small room was empty. The blanket he had given her was folded neatly on the floor, and his jacket hung on a nail on the wall. There was no sign of Marie or her bundle of possessions. She's gone, he reported to Sergeant Miller, who was checking his equipment nearby. Miller raised an eyebrow. Gone where? When? I don't know, Sarge. Must have left during the night. Miller frowned. Did she take anything? Calloway shook his head. No, nothing. She even left my jacket. Well, that's something, I suppose, and Miller said, though he still looked concerned. Maybe she went to find that cousin she mentioned. Yeah, maybe, Calloway agreed, though he felt strangely disappointed that she had left without saying goodbye. As the unit prepared to depart for patrol, Lieutenant Hayes arrived with a message from headquarters. His expression was unusually grave as he gathered the men. Change of plans, gentlemen, Hayes announced. All patrols are cancelled. We're on full alert status as of now. What's happening, sir? Miller asked, voicing the question on everyone's mind. Hayes took a deep breath before responding. At approximately 0400 this morning, German forces launched a major offensive along a 60-mile front in the Ardennes. They've broken through in several sectors and are advancing rapidly. The 101st Airborne is being deployed to establish defensive positions. We move out in 30 minutes. A stunned silence fell over the room. After weeks of relative quiet, the sudden news of a massive German counterattack was shocking. "How bad is it, sir?" Jackson finally asked. "Bad enough," Hayes replied grimly. "Early reports suggest it's their biggest offensive since 1940. Multiple panzer divisions supported by infantry. They caught several of our forward units completely by surprise." Calloway felt a cold dread settling in his stomach. The timing was too perfect to be coincidental. The German attack coming just hours after a civilian had stayed in their quarters, then disappeared before dawn. "Sir," he began hesitantly, "about the Belgian woman who stayed here last night." "What Belgian woman?" Hayes interrupted sharply. Miller quickly explained the situation, his own expression now showing concern as the implications became clear. Hayes's face darkened. "You allowed an unauthorized civilian to spend the night in a military post, the very night before a major German offensive. Do you realize what you've done?" "Sir, her papers were checked by the MPs," Calloway protested, though his voice lacked conviction. "They seemed legitimate." "Papers can be forged," Hayes snapped. "For all we know, she could have been gathering intelligence on our positions, our strength, our readiness. This could be a serious breach of security." The full weight of the situation crashed down on Calloway. Had he been manipulated? Was Marie actually a German spy who had used his compassion against him? The thought made him feel physically ill. "I'll need to report this to Captain Thompson immediately," Hayes continued. "In the meantime, prepare to move out. We have a war to fight, regardless of what information the enemy may or may not have." As the men scrambled to gather their equipment, Calloway moved through a fog of guilt and confusion. How could he have been so naive? So easily deceived by a pretty face and a sad story. "Don't beat yourself up too much, kid," Miller said quietly, noticing Calloway's distress. "If she was a spy, she fooled the MPs too, and me." "But I'm the one who brought her here," Calloway replied, his voice hollow. Miller clapped him on the shoulder. "What's done is done. Focus on what's ahead now. That's all any of us can do." Within the half hour, the unit was moving out, joining the larger deployment of the 101st Airborne. As they marched through the streets of Bastogne, Calloway couldn't help scanning the faces of the Belgian civilians they passed, half expecting to see Marie among them. But she was nowhere to be seen. The magnitude of the German offensive became increasingly clear as they approached their designated defensive positions. Refugees were streaming in from the east, bringing tales of rapid German advances and overwhelming force. American units that had been on the front lines were falling back in disarray, many having suffered heavy casualties in the initial assault. By midday, the 101st had established a perimeter around Bastogne, digging in for what promised to be a desperate defense. The weather had worsened, with heavy clouds threatening snow and effectively grounding Allied air support. It was exactly the kind of conditions that favored the attacking German forces. Captain Thompson gathered the officers and non-commissioned officers for a briefing as the men continued to prepare their positions. His face was grim as he outlined the situation. "Gentlemen, I won't sugarcoat this. We're in a precarious position. German armored columns are advancing from multiple directions and they're moving fast. Our mission is to hold Bastogne at all costs. This crossroads is vital to the entire Allied position in this sector." He pointed to various locations on his map. "We have elements of at least 3 German panzer divisions converging on our position, supported by substantial infantry. Conservative estimates put their strength at over 5 divisions, possibly as many as 7. "What kind of reinforcements can we expect, sir?" one of the lieutenants asked. Thompson's expression grew even more somber. "For the immediate future, none. The German breakthrough has disrupted the entire front. Most of our reserves are being directed to other critical sectors. We're on our own for now." The implications were clear. They were vastly outnumbered and would soon be surrounded if the German advance continued at its current pace. "What about supplies, sir?" Miller asked. "We're already running low on ammunition and medical equipment. Airdrops when weather permits, Thompson replied. "But with the current conditions, that's not likely to happen soon. We'll have to make do with what we have." As the meeting concluded, Miller rejoined his squad, sharing the grim news in more measured terms to avoid spreading panic. But the men weren't fools. They could see the situation developing around them, could hear the distant sound of artillery growing steadily closer. "So we're surrounded, outgunned, and on our own," Jackson summarized bluntly. "Terrific. We've been in tight spots before," Miller reminded them. "The 101st doesn't break, no matter the odds." Calloway tried to focus on preparing his position, a shallow foxhole that offered minimal protection from artillery, but at least provided some cover from direct fire. Yet he couldn't shake the nagging guilt about Marie. Had he compromised their security? Had his moment of compassion inadvertently contributed to this disaster? As dusk approached, bringing with it a light snowfall that further reduced visibility, Lieutenant Hayes appeared at their position. His expression was unreadable as he approached Calloway. "Private, come with me," he ordered without preamble. Calloway exchanged a worried glance with Miller before following the lieutenant. They made their way through the defensive perimeter to a command post that had been established in a partially damaged building near the town center. Inside, Captain Thompson was conferring with several other officers. He looked up as Hayes and Calloway entered, his expression stern. "Private Calloway," Thompson said, his voice tight with controlled anger. "Lieutenant Hayes has informed me about the civilian woman who stayed at your post last night. I need you to tell me everything about her, every detail you can remember, no matter how insignificant it might seem." Calloway swallowed hard. "Yes, sir. Her name was Marie Dubois. She was in her mid-20s, dark hair, about 5'4". She spoke French primarily, but knew some English. She said her home had been requisitioned, and she needed somewhere to stay for the night. The MPs checked her papers before sending her with me." "And what did she ask about while she was there?" Thompson pressed. "Did she show any particular interest in our operations, our strength, our plans?" "No, sir," Calloway replied, trying to recall every moment of their brief interaction. "She mostly kept to herself. We talked briefly about our families, but not about military matters." "Did she have any unusual equipment? A radio, perhaps? Or did she leave the storage room during the night?" "Not that I know of, sir. She just had a small bundle with some personal belongings, and I don't think she left during the night. At least I didn't hear anything. She was just gone in the morning." Thompson exchanged a look with Hayes that Calloway couldn't interpret. "Private, do you realize the seriousness of this situation? The timing of this woman's appearance and the subsequent German offensive cannot be coincidental." "I understand, sir," Calloway said, his voice hollow. "I take full responsibility for my actions." Thompson was silent for a long moment, studying Calloway's face. "This matter will be fully investigated after the current crisis is resolved. For now, return to your unit and prepare for what's coming. We'll need every man ready to fight." "Yes, sir," Calloway replied, saluting before turning to leave. Outside, the snow was falling more heavily now, adding to the sense of isolation that had descended upon Bastogne. As Calloway made his way back to his position, he couldn't help but wonder if somewhere beyond the American lines, Marie, or whatever her real name might be, was reporting to German officers about the defenses of the town, about the morale of its defenders, about the young private from Oklahoma who had been foolish enough to trust a stranger in wartime. Dawn broke on December 13th, with a sky heavy with snow clouds, casting a grey pallor over the defensive positions surrounding Bastogne. Private Calloway, having barely slept, observed the white landscape from his foxhole with red-rimmed eyes. The temperature had dropped further overnight, and the light snowfall had transformed into several inches of accumulation that blanketed the fields and forests surrounding the town. "Anything moving out there?" Corporal Jackson asked, joining him at the edge of their position. Calloway shook his head. "Nothing. Too quiet." "Like the calm before the storm," Jackson muttered, his breath forming clouds in the frigid air. Sergeant Miller approached, carrying 3 steaming cups of what passed for coffee in their current circumstances. A weak, bitter concoction that nonetheless offered blessed warmth and caffeine. "Command post just got updated intelligence," Miller informed them as he distributed the cups. "German armor is less than 5 miles from our position to the east. Artillery spotters report massive movement of enemy forces converging on Bastogne from multiple directions. Calloway wrapped his cold fingers around the cup, grateful for even this small comfort. "How long do we have, Sarge?" "Hours, not days," Miller replied grimly. "The snow is slowing them down some, but they've got tanks, lots of them. And without air support, we can't do much to stop their advance until they're right on top of us." The three men fell silent, each contemplating the gravity of their situation. Despite their training and experience, the prospect of facing an overwhelming enemy force with limited supplies and no reinforcements was sobering. "Any word on the civilian?" Jackson eventually asked, glancing at Calloway. "The Belgian woman." Miller shook his head. "Command's got bigger concerns right now than one missing civilian, spy or not." Calloway stared into his coffee, the guilt he'd been carrying since the previous day sitting like a stone in his stomach. "If she was gathering intelligence for the Germans, then I'm responsible for—" "You're responsible for following orders and defending this position," Miller interrupted firmly. "Nothing more, nothing less. Whatever happened yesterday is done. Focus on today, on staying alive." Before Calloway could respond, the distant rumble of artillery shattered the morning quiet. All three men instinctively ducked lower in their foxhole, though the shells were landing well outside their position for now, ranging shots, testing the distance. "Here we go," Miller muttered, discarding his coffee cup and checking his weapon. "Jackson, run to Lieutenant Hayes and tell him we're hearing artillery from the east. Calloway, make sure everyone in the squad is awake and ready." As Jackson sprinted off and Calloway moved to rouse the few men who had managed to catch some sleep, the artillery fire intensified. The distant thumps of shells landing grew more frequent, more accurate, steadily moving closer to the American positions. Within the hour, the entire perimeter was on full alert. The men of the 101st Airborne, along with elements of other units that had fallen back to Bastogne, prepared for the coming assault with grim determination. They were surrounded, outnumbered, and running low on supplies, but surrender was not an option. Lieutenant Hayes moved among the positions, offering encouragement and checking defenses. When he reached Calloway's squad, his expression was tense but controlled. "They're probing our eastern perimeter," Hayes informed Miller. "Reconnaissance reports at least 50 tanks supported by mechanized infantry. They'll hit us hard, trying to punch through to the town center." "We'll hold, sir," Miller assured him, though how they would do so against such overwhelming force remained unstated. Hayes nodded. "Captain Thompson is redeploying some of our anti-tank assets to your sector. They should arrive within the hour. Until then, hold your fire until they're within effective range. We can't waste ammunition." As Hayes moved on to the next position, Miller gathered his squad. "You heard the lieutenant. Conserve ammunition, make every shot count. If they break through, fall back to the secondary positions, but not before." Questions? There were none. Each man understood what was required of him. The morning stretched into afternoon, the sporadic artillery fire continuing to harass the American positions while causing minimal actual damage, a tactic designed to wear down the defenders' nerves before the main assault. Calloway alternated between scanning the tree line for enemy movement and checking his equipment. His M1 Garand rifle was clean and operational, though he had only 40 rounds of ammunition remaining, a stark reminder of their precarious supply situation. "Hey, Calloway," Jackson called from nearby, his voice low. "You got family waiting back home?" The question seemed odd given their circumstances, but Calloway understood the need for distraction. "Parents, 2 brothers and a sister. They're in Tulsa. My dad works for the railroad." "You?" "Just my mother," Jackson replied. "Father died when I was 12. Got a girl, though, Evelyn. We're getting married when I get back." He pulled out a worn photograph from his breast pocket, showing it to Calloway. A pretty young woman with a bright smile looked back from the image. "She's beautiful," Calloway said sincerely. Jackson carefully returned the photo to his pocket. "Yeah, she is. Smart, too. Works at a defense plant in Detroit now, building airplane parts." He paused, then added more quietly, "Wanted to talk about her, just in case, you know." Calloway nodded, understanding the unspoken sentiment. In the face of what was coming, many men were making their peace, thinking of loved ones, preparing mentally for the worst while hoping for the best. The first sign of the main assault came at approximately 1400 hours. The distinct rumble of tank engines carried on the cold air. Miller ordered his men to their positions, reminding them again to hold their fire until the enemy was within range. Minutes stretched into an eternity as the sounds grew louder. Finally, the first German tanks emerged from the tree line approximately 800 yards from their position. Massive steel beasts crawling across the snow-covered field, their main guns sweeping back and forth, searching for targets. "Steady," Miller called, his voice calm despite the intimidating sight before them. Behind the tanks came the infantry, German soldiers in white winter camouflage, moving in practiced formations, using the armor for cover. It was an impressive and terrifying display of military might. At 500 yards, Hayes gave the order to open fire. American artillery, carefully conserved until this moment, landed among the advancing forces. Anti-tank guns fired from concealed positions, targeting the lead vehicles. Infantry weapons joined the cacophony, a desperate attempt to slow the overwhelming force bearing down on them. 2 German tanks erupted in flames, their ammunition cooking off in spectacular explosions. Several more took hits, but continued to advance, impervious to all but direct hits in vulnerable areas. The infantry suffered more severely, dozens falling to American fire. But there seemed to be an endless supply of replacements stepping forward to take their place. Through it all, Calloway fired methodically, focusing on the infantry, aware that his rifle would do little against armored vehicles. Each shot was carefully aimed, each spent casing a reminder of their dwindling resources. The battle raged for hours, ebbing and flowing across the snow-covered fields surrounding Bastogne. The Germans would advance, suffer casualties, pull back to regroup, then attack again from a different direction. By nightfall, they had probed the entire American perimeter, testing for weaknesses but not yet committing to a full-scale breakthrough attempt. As darkness fell, an eerie quiet descended upon the battlefield. The wounded were evacuated to makeshift field hospitals in the town center. Ammunition was redistributed among the surviving defenders, and hasty repairs were made to damaged defenses. Calloway's squad had been fortunate. No fatalities, though 2 men had suffered minor wounds. They rotated watch duty through the night, allowing each soldier a few precious hours of rest. During his shift, Calloway stared into the darkness beyond their lines, listening for any sound that might indicate renewed German activity. His thoughts inevitably returned to Marie. Was she out there somewhere beyond the American lines? Had she been reporting their positions, their strength, their vulnerabilities to German officers? The thought still made him sick with guilt and anger, not just at her potential betrayal but at his own naivety. The sound of approaching footsteps pulled him from his dark reflections. Captain Thompson, accompanied by a runner, was making his way along the front line, checking positions and speaking with the men. "How are you holding up, Private?" Thompson asked as he reached Calloway's position. "Fine, sir," Calloway replied automatically. Thompson studied him for a moment before speaking again. "I reviewed the report about the civilian woman. The MPs who checked her papers have confirmed they appeared legitimate. Whether she was who she claimed to be or not, you followed proper channels in bringing her to your quarters." Calloway was surprised by this unexpected absolution. "Thank you, sir. But if she was a spy—" "Then she was very good at her job," Thompson interrupted, "and you weren't the first or last soldier to be deceived by enemy intelligence. Focus on the fight ahead, Calloway. That's where you're needed now." As Thompson moved on to the next position, Calloway felt some of the weight lift from his shoulders. While the captain's words didn't completely alleviate his guilt, they provided a measure of perspective that helped him refocus on the immediate threat. The night passed slowly, punctuated by occasional flares and sporadic artillery fire. Harassment tactics designed to prevent the defenders from resting. By dawn, it was clear the Germans were repositioning for another major assault. December 14th brought more snow and deteriorating visibility, conditions that further hampered any hope of Allied air support. From their defensive positions, the men of the 101st watched anxiously as German forces once again began to mass at the edge of their perimeter. "They're concentrating on the western approach this time," Miller informed his squad after returning from a briefing at the command post. "That means we're likely to see less direct action in our sector, but be ready to reinforce other positions if needed. As predicted, the main German thrust came from the west, hitting the positions held by elements of the 28th Infantry Division with devastating force. Throughout the morning, Calloway and his squad could hear the battle raging across town, the distinctive sound of tank fire interspersed with the rattle of small arms. By midday, reports indicated the western perimeter was in danger of collapse. Hayes ordered half of their squad to reinforce the threatened sector, leaving Miller, Calloway, Jackson, and 3 others to maintain their current position. "Watch for opportunistic probes," Miller warned as the others departed. "They might test our line if they think we're under strength." Sure enough, within the hour, movement was spotted at the edge of the tree line to their front, a small force of German infantry advancing cautiously, likely sent to assess the American defenses. "Hold fire until they're within 300 yards, Miller ordered. "Make them think we've been pulled away too." The German patrol, approximately 20 men, continued their advance across the open field, apparently unaware they were being observed. At the designated range, Miller gave the order to fire. The 6 Americans opened up simultaneously, catching the patrol in a deadly crossfire. Within minutes, the engagement was over. The few surviving Germans retreated hastily to the tree line, leaving their dead and wounded in the snow. "They'll be back," Miller predicted grimly, "and in greater numbers next time." He was proven correct less than 2 hours later when a much larger force emerged from the forest, at least a company of infantry supported by 3 tanks. This was no probe, but a determined effort to exploit what the Germans believed to be a weakened section of the American line. "Jackson, get to the command post. Tell them we need anti-tank support immediately," Miller ordered as the enemy force began its advance. With Jackson gone, the 5 remaining defenders prepared for what promised to be an uneven battle. Their position, while well constructed, was not designed to withstand a concentrated assault by armor and infantry. "Conserve ammunition," Miller reminded them. "Focus on the infantry first. Without them, the tanks will be vulnerable to our anti-tank teams if they arrive in time." The German force advanced methodically, the tanks taking the lead with infantry following closely behind. When they reached approximately 400 yards, Miller gave the order to open fire. The Americans targeted the infantry, trying to separate them from the armored protection of the tanks. The strategy had limited success. While they inflicted casualties among the German infantry, the tanks continued their relentless advance, impervious to the rifle fire directed their way. When the lead tank was approximately 200 yards from their position, it fired its main gun, the shell impacting just behind Calloway's foxhole, showering them with dirt and snow. "We need to fall back to the secondary position," Miller shouted over the din of battle. "We can't stop those tanks without support." As the men prepared to withdraw, the distinctive sound of an incoming artillery barrage filled the air. For a moment, Calloway feared it was German artillery targeting their position. Then the shells began landing with remarkable precision among the advancing enemy force. One of the tanks took a direct hit, its turret blown clean off by the force of the explosion. The other 2 immediately changed course, seeking cover that didn't exist in the open field. The infantry, caught in the open, suffered heavy casualties from the unexpected barrage. "That's not our artillery," Miller said, his expression confused. "The angle's wrong, it's coming from behind the German lines." Before anyone could respond to this puzzling observation, Jackson returned, breathless from his run. "Sir, command says they can't spare any anti-tank assets. They're fully committed on the western perimeter." "Then who the hell is dropping shells on those Germans?" Miller demanded. Jackson shook his head. "No idea, sir, but Captain Thompson said to hold this position at all costs. Reinforcements are being sent our way." The mysterious artillery continued for several minutes, effectively halting the German assault. The 2 remaining tanks retreated to the tree line, while the infantry either followed or lay motionless in the blood-stained snow. As the barrage lifted, an eerie quiet descended upon their sector. The defenders used the respite to redistribute ammunition and tend to minor wounds. No one could explain the timely artillery support that had saved their position, but they were grateful nonetheless. An hour later, Lieutenant Hayes arrived with the promised reinforcements, a platoon from Baker Company that had been held in reserve. With them came news that simultaneously clarified and complicated the situation. "We've got reports of fighting behind German lines," Hayes informed Miller as the reinforcements began integrating into their defensive position. Specifically, artillery fire directed against German formations from what should be secure areas under their control. "Friendly fire?" Miller suggested. "Maybe their own artillery got confused about target coordinates." Hayes shook his head. "Not likely. It's too consistent, too targeted. Intelligence suggests it might be elements of the Belgian resistance operating captured German equipment, or possibly Allied special forces that were behind the lines when the offensive began." Calloway, overhearing this conversation, felt a strange prickling sensation at the base of his neck. Could it be connected to Marie somehow? The timing seemed too coincidental. By evening, the pattern had become clear. German forces approaching their sector were consistently met with unexpected artillery fire from behind their own lines, disrupting their attacks and causing significant casualties. Similar reports were coming in from other sections of the Bastogne perimeter, though less frequently. December 15th dawned cold and clear, the snow having stopped overnight. German pressure on Bastogne continued unabated, with attacks coming from all directions as they attempted to crush the American defenders and secure the vital crossroads. Despite the continued mysterious support from unknown artillery, the situation for the defenders grew increasingly desperate. Ammunition was running critically low, medical supplies were nearly exhausted, and casualties were mounting. Without resupply or reinforcement, it was only a matter of time before the perimeter would be breached. At the morning briefing, Captain Thompson outlined their deteriorating situation with brutal honesty. "Gentlemen, I won't pretend our position isn't precarious. We have perhaps 2 days of ammunition at current expenditure rates, and our casualties are approaching 20%. However, our orders remain unchanged. Hold Bastogne at all costs." "What about the artillery support we've been receiving, sir?" one of the lieutenants asked. "Any identification on who's providing it?" Thompson shook his head. "Nothing definitive, but it's buying us precious time, and for that, we're grateful to whoever's responsible." After the briefing, as Calloway was returning to his position, he was summoned to the command post by Captain Thompson's runner. Confused and somewhat concerned, he followed the runner through the battered streets of Bastogne to the headquarters building. Inside, he was directed to a small room where Captain Thompson was waiting, along with a civilian man Calloway didn't recognize. The man was in his 50s, with graying hair and the weathered face of someone who had spent a lifetime outdoors. "Private Calloway," Thompson said as he entered. "This is John Dubois. He's with the local resistance and has some information I believe you'll find interesting." Calloway felt a jolt at the surname, the same as Marie's. "Dubois, sir? Any relation to Marie Dubois?" The older man's face lit up with recognition. "You know my niece Marie. She stayed at our position briefly right before the offensive began," Calloway replied carefully, still uncertain where this conversation was heading. John nodded. "That is why I asked to speak with you. Marie has sent a message. She wishes to meet with you. Tonight." Calloway looked to Captain Thompson in confusion. The captain's expression was unreadable. "Mr. Dubois has been working with our intelligence officers since he arrived this morning," Thompson explained. "He came through the German lines with information about enemy positions and strength. According to him, Marie is part of a resistance cell operating behind German lines." "She's with the resistance?" Calloway asked, struggling to reconcile this with his suspicions of her being a German spy. John nodded. "For 3 years now. When the Germans invaded, our family joined the resistance. Marie's father, my brother, and her brother were captured and executed in 1942. Since then, Marie has been one of our most effective operatives. But she disappeared right before the German offensive," Calloway pointed out. "The timing was deliberate," Jean confirmed. "She received word from one of our informants within the German army about the planned attack. She left immediately to warn our cell and prepare countermeasures." Captain Thompson stepped in. "According to Mr. Dubois, Marie's cell has been responsible for the artillery fire disrupting German attacks on our positions. They captured several German artillery pieces during previous operations and had them hidden in the forest. When the offensive began, They repositioned them to fire on German formations from behind. Calloway felt a wave of relief, mixed with shame at having suspected Marie of betrayal. So she wasn't a spy. She was trying to help us. More than that, Jean said proudly, she has been coordinating our entire operation, and now she needs to speak with you urgently. She has information about German plans that must reach your high command, but she cannot come into Bastogne herself. She is too valuable behind enemy lines. Captain Thompson regarded Calloway seriously. Normally, I wouldn't consider sending a private on such a mission, but Marie specifically asked for you by name. She trusts you, and right now, trust is in short supply. I'm making this voluntary, Calloway. If you agree, Mr. Dubois will guide you through the German lines tonight to meet with Marie. The gravity of the request wasn't lost on Calloway. Moving through enemy territory in the dead of winter, possibly encountering German patrols, the risks were substantial. Yet he felt a responsibility to Marie, a need to make amends for having doubted her. I'll do it. Sir, he said without hesitation. Thompson nodded, seemingly unsurprised by Calloway's decision. You'll leave at 2100 hours. Mr. Dubois knows a route that should avoid the main German positions. Take only essential equipment, weapons, ammunition, winter gear. Travel light and fast. Yes, sir, Calloway replied. As he left the command post to prepare for the mission, Calloway's mind was racing. Marie, the frightened refugee he'd taken pity on, was actually a resistance fighter who had been working to save American lives. The revelation was both humbling and inspiring. Back at his position, he informed Sergeant Miller about the mission. The sergeant's initial reaction was concern. Going behind enemy lines with a civilian guide you just met? That's risky. Calloway. Captain Thompson has vetted him, Sarge, and if there's information that can help us hold Bastogne, it's worth the risk. Miller sighed, clearly unhappy, but unwilling to contradict a direct order from the captain. Just be careful out there. The Germans aren't taking prisoners in this offensive, not from us and certainly not from resistance fighters. As night fell, Calloway prepared his equipment. He checked his rifle, counted his limited ammunition, and ensured his cold-weather gear was as effective as possible given their limited supplies. Jackson helped him blacken his face with charcoal to reduce visibility in the snow. You know, if you'd told me a week ago that you'd be sneaking through German lines to meet a beautiful resistance fighter, I'd have said you were reading too many adventure magazines, Jackson commented as he applied the charcoal. Calloway managed a small smile. Believe me, this isn't how I planned to spend my December either. At precisely 2100 hours, Calloway met Jean Dubois at a designated building near the eastern perimeter. The older man was dressed in nondescript civilian clothes with a heavy coat, carrying a small rucksack. We must move quickly and silently, Jean instructed in his accented English. The German patrols are frequent, but predictable. We will use the forest for cover as much as possible. After a final check by Captain Thompson, who had come personally to see them off, they slipped through the American lines and into the darkness beyond. The night was clear and cold, the nearly full moon casting enough light to navigate by while still providing shadows for concealment. Jean moved with surprising agility for his age, guiding Calloway through fields and forests with the confidence of someone intimately familiar with the terrain. They avoided roads and open areas, taking advantage of natural features to mask their movement. Twice they were forced to hide as German patrols passed nearby, pressing themselves into snowdrifts or the shadows of trees until the danger had passed. Each time, Jean's knowledge of patrol patterns proved accurate, allowing them to continue their journey without detection. After approximately 2 hours of careful movement, they approached a small farmhouse nestled in a wooded valley approximately 3 miles from Bastogne. No lights were visible from the structure, but Jean approached confidently, making a distinctive pattern of knocks on the door. After a moment, the door opened slightly. A hushed conversation in French followed before they were ushered inside. The interior was dimly lit by a single oil lamp, revealing a sparse but clean living area. And there, standing by a small table covered with maps, was Marie. She looked different from Calloway's memory, more confident, more focused. Gone was the frightened refugee. In her place stood a determined resistance fighter. She wore practical clothing, trousers, a heavy sweater, and a leather jacket. A pistol was holstered at her hip. "Thomas," she said warmly, switching to English, "thank you for coming. I was not sure you would trust me after I left so suddenly." "I'll admit I had doubts," Calloway replied honestly, "but it seems I misjudged you." Marie nodded, understanding in her eyes. It was necessary to leave quickly. We received word of the German offensive just hours before it began. I needed to reach my cell immediately to prepare our response. She gestured to the maps on the table. "Please join me. There is much to discuss and little time." As Calloway moved closer, he could see the maps detailed German positions surrounding Bastogne, with annotations indicating strength, unit identification, and movement patterns. The level of detail was impressive, clearly the work of an effective intelligence network. "Your artillery has been hitting the Germans approaching our positions," Calloway observed, recognizing the areas marked on the map. Marie nodded. "We have 3 captured German field pieces positioned here, here, and here," she indicated points on the map. "We move them regularly to avoid detection. But we are small in number, just 12 fighters. We cannot stop the German advance, only disrupt it in key areas." "Even that disruption has been invaluable," Calloway assured her. "You've saved many American lives." She acknowledged this with a small smile before returning to business. "But I did not ask you to come, just to explain our actions. I have critical information that must reach your commanders immediately." Marie pointed to several locations on the map, marked with red circles. "These are the German ammunition and fuel depots supporting the offensive. They are vulnerable, protected by minimal security because they are far behind the front lines. If your air forces could strike these locations when the weather clears, it would severely hamper the German ability to sustain their attack." Calloway studied the locations carefully, committing them to memory. "Our air support has been grounded by the weather, but meteorology reports suggest it might clear in the next 48 hours. There is more," Marie continued. "We have identified the headquarters of the 5th Panzer Army, located here." She indicated a manor house several miles from Bastogne. "General von Manteuffel is coordinating the assault from this location. A precision strike would disrupt their command and control significantly." The information was indeed valuable, potentially game-changing if acted upon quickly. Calloway understood now why Thompson had approved this risky mission. "I'll make sure this reaches Captain Thompson immediately," Calloway promised. Marie nodded gratefully. "There is one more thing, Thomas. Something personal." Her expression softened slightly. "When I stayed with your unit that night, your kindness meant more than you know. In this war, such simple humanity is rare and precious." Calloway felt a warmth spread through him, despite the cold night. "I was just doing what anyone would do." "No," Marie said firmly. "Not anyone. Many would have turned me away. Your compassion reminded me why we fight, not just against something, but for something, for a world where kindness matters more than power." Before Calloway could respond, Jean entered from an adjoining room where he had been conferring with other resistance members. "We must go soon," he warned. "German patrols will increase near dawn. If you are to return to Bastogne safely, we should leave within the hour." Marie nodded in agreement. "He is right. But before you go, we have something for you." She moved to a cabinet and removed several packages wrapped in oilcloth. "Medical supplies and ammunition. Not much, but perhaps useful for your unit." Calloway was touched by the gesture. Even with their limited resources, the resistance fighters were willing to share with the besieged Americans. "Thank you," he said sincerely. "This will help." As he prepared to depart with Jean, Marie approached him one last time. "Be careful, Thomas, and tell your commanders that we will continue to disrupt German operations however we can. You are not alone in this fight." With that promise, Calloway and Jean began their perilous journey back through German lines toward Bastogne. The return trip proved more challenging than the outbound journey, with increased German activity forcing them to take a more circuitous route. Dawn was breaking as they finally approached the American perimeter. Identifying themselves to the sentries, they were quickly ushered through the lines and escorted to the command post, where an exhausted but alert Captain Thompson was waiting. Calloway provided a detailed report of everything Marie had shown him, particularly the locations of the German supply depots and headquarters. Thompson listened intently, occasionally marking positions on his own map. "This is excellent intelligence, Calloway," Thompson said when the report was complete. "I'll transmit it to division headquarters immediately. If the weather clears as predicted, we might see air support within 48 hours. "What about our situation until then, sir?" Calloway asked. Thompson's expression was grim but determined. "We hold. That's our job, to hold Bastogne until relief arrives. Every day we maintain this position disrupts the entire German offensive timetable." In the days that followed, the defenders of Bastogne continued their desperate resistance. Ammunition grew scarcer, casualties mounted, and conditions deteriorated as the winter cold intensified. But throughout it all, the mysterious artillery support from Marie's resistance cell continued to disrupt German attacks at critical moments, buying precious time for the beleaguered Americans. On December 23rd, the skies finally cleared. Within hours, Allied aircraft appeared overhead, first reconnaissance planes, then fighters, and finally the lumbering transport aircraft dropping desperately needed supplies by parachute. Among the supplies were precision coordinates for airstrikes against the German logistics hubs Marie had identified. Strategic bombing missions were launched immediately, targeting the fuel and ammunition depots supporting the offensive. The effects were dramatic and immediate. German attacks lost momentum as supply lines were disrupted. On December 26th, lead elements of General Patton's Third Army broke through the German encirclement, relieving Bastogne after nearly 2 weeks of isolation. The tide of the battle had turned, and while fighting would continue for weeks, the German offensive had been effectively blunted. In the aftermath, as reinforcements poured into Bastogne and the wounded were evacuated, Calloway found himself summoned once again to Captain Thompson's office. To his surprise, Marie was there, looking tired but triumphant. "The Germans are retreating from this sector," she informed them without preamble. "Your airstrikes were devastatingly effective. Combined with Patton's breakthrough, they've broken the offensive's back." Thompson nodded appreciatively. "We owe you and your resistance fighters a great debt, Miss Dubois. Your information and support were instrumental in our defense." Marie shook her head modestly. "We all fought together, each in our own way." After the formal debriefing, Calloway had a few moments alone with Marie. Outside Thompson's office, amidst the bustle of military activity, they shared a quiet conversation. "What will you do now?" Calloway asked. "Continue the fight," Marie replied without hesitation. "The Germans may be retreating here, but the war is not over. There are still occupied towns, imprisoned civilians, battles to be won before Europe is free." Calloway nodded, understanding her commitment. "Will I see you again?" Marie smiled, a genuine warmth in her expression. "Perhaps, when the war ends, and it will end, Thomas, come back to Bastogne. I will show you my country in peacetime, when it is beautiful again." "I'd like that," Calloway replied sincerely. As they parted, Marie surprised him by pressing a small object into his hand, a simple brass button. "From my father's coat," she explained. "A reminder that even the smallest acts of kindness can lead to unexpected alliances. Keep it safe for me until we meet again." In the months that followed, as the Allied forces pushed toward Germany and final victory, Calloway often thought about Marie and the resistance fighters who had saved so many American lives during the desperate defense of Bastogne. The brass button became his talisman, a reminder of courage and compassion amidst the chaos of war. When the war in Europe finally ended in May 1945, Calloway was among the millions of American servicemen preparing to return home. Before leaving the continent, however, he made a detour to Bastogne, now peacefully rebuilding after the devastation of the winter battles. In the town square, a simple memorial had been erected to honor those who had fought to defend the crucial crossroads. Among the names listed were not just American soldiers, but Belgian resistance fighters as well, including Marie Dubois. Calloway traced her name with his finger, a sense of loss washing over him. He had hoped to see her again, to share stories of the final days of the war, to perhaps explore what might have been between them in peacetime. "She would be pleased you came back," said a familiar voice behind him. Calloway turned to see Jean Dubois, looking older but somehow more at peace than during their nighttime journey through enemy lines. "I was hoping to find her here," Calloway admitted. Jean's expression grew solemn. Marie continued her resistance work until the very end. In March, her cell was ambushed while sabotaging a German train near Liège. She ensured everyone else escaped, but was captured herself. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. The Germans executed her 3 days before Allied forces liberated the area. The news hit Calloway like a physical blow. He closed his eyes, remembering Marie's determination, her courage, her simple humanity in the face of overwhelming inhumanity. "She spoke of you often," Jean continued gently. "The American soldier who showed kindness when it was most needed, who reminded her why the fight mattered." Calloway reached into his pocket and withdrew the brass button Marie had given him. "She asked me to keep this safe until we met again." Jean nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Then you must keep it still. Some meetings are not meant for this world, perhaps." As Calloway prepared to leave Bastogne for the final time, he placed a small package at the base of the memorial. Marie's button wrapped in a handwritten note of gratitude, not just for her wartime assistance, but for the reminder that even in humanity's darkest hours, compassion and courage could still flourish. Years later, long after returning to Oklahoma, starting a career with the railroad like his father before him, marrying and raising 3 children, Thomas Calloway would still sometimes think of those desperate days in Bastogne, and the woman who had appeared one cold night seeking shelter, only to return the favor 1,000-fold. In 1969, when his oldest son asked him about his war experiences for a school project, Calloway shared the story of Marie and the resistance fighters for the first time. His son, incredulous, asked how he could have trusted a stranger during wartime. "Sometimes," Calloway replied, thinking carefully about his words, "you have to trust that the humanity in others will answer the humanity in yourself. Marie taught me that a single act of kindness can ripple outward in ways you could never predict. That might be the most important lesson I brought home from the war." In 1974, Calloway returned to Bastogne for a 30th anniversary commemoration of the battle. The town had been fully rebuilt, with few visible scars remaining from the conflict that had once engulfed it. The memorial in the square had been expanded, with Marie's name now prominently featured among the honored resistance fighters. As he stood before it, an elderly Belgian man approached him. "You are Thomas Calloway," the man said, not a question but a statement. Surprised, Calloway nodded. "I am. How did you know?" The man smiled. "Marie described you very clearly in her letters. I am Pierre Dubois, her cousin from the next village, the one she was supposedly going to stay with." They spoke for hours in a small cafe overlooking the square, sharing memories of Marie and those desperate days during the winter of 1944. Pierre revealed that Marie's final letter, smuggled out of prison before her execution, had included a message for Calloway if he should ever return. She wrote that the night she spent under your protection reminded her that walls between people, nationality, language, circumstance, are never as strong as the bridges of compassion we build in the darkest times, that your simple kindness gave her the strength to continue fighting when all seemed lost. Calloway returned home from that visit with a renewed appreciation for how seemingly small actions could resonate across decades. The story of Marie Dubois and the defense of Bastogne became not just a tale of military strategy or resistance heroism, but a testament to the enduring power of human connection, even in the midst of global conflict. When asked in his later years about his most significant wartime memory, Calloway would always point not to the battles or the hardships, but to the night a frightened woman appeared at their position seeking shelter, and how that simple encounter had revealed the extraordinary potential of ordinary compassion. And that concludes our story. If you made it this far, please share your thoughts in the comments. What part of this historical account surprised you most? Don't forget to subscribe for more untold stories from World War II, and check out the video on screen for another incredible tale from history. Until next time.